Hi, I am Mohammed Shoaib. Today I'll be deploying Strapi Headless CMS on AWS using Terraform for infrastructure as a code and Docker for containerization. I'll walk you through the code, the deployment process, and the final output. So let me share my screen, which will be here. So let me walk you through the Docker file where I have two different stages. First is for the build stage, and the second is for a runtime stage, where this command installs the tools and libraries required to compile the dependencies. Later, it sets the working directory to this particular path, and then first it copies only the package on package.json files to reduce the container cache, and then run npm CI command installs the deployment dependencies and avoids the development dependencies, and then copies all source code to the current directory, and then it runs the command npm run build while followed by a runtime stage. It only installs the two dependencies where WIPS is required for the image processing and PostgreSQL required for the DB commands to communicate within the container. Again, it sets the working directory to this particular path, and then it copies the required files from the build stage, and then it copies to this particular path, and then it sets the environment to the production, and then this command ensures the local binary file is set to the appropriate paths, and then later within container it upgrades or updates the npm and installs this particular version, and then later it sets the ownership to the non-root user and switches to the that particular user, and then later it exposes to the 1337 port, which is the default port for the Strapi headless application, and then later it runs the container command. Let's have a look on the Terraform code. I have used AWS as my cloud provider and set region to the Mumbai. I've used default VPC, but actually it is not recommended. I used to use the custom VPC, but as of now, I've used the default VPC, and later I've created a security group that inbounds the four protocols, which is 1337 is for Strapi, and then for 5432 port number is for PostgreSQL, and then port number 80 and 443 is for HTTPS requests. And then later I've created a RDS instance that uses Postgres as SQL, and set it as publicly accessible. Later, moving further, I've created a CloudWatch, which is a monitoring tool for the application, which write logs. This IAM, and here in this section, this IAM role grants the permission for grants the ECS task permission, like pulling the images from ECR and then writing the logs to the CloudWatch. Later, I've created ECS cluster and defined the task definition where I've used a Fargate over the ECS, pulls the images from ECR and sets the environment variable for Postgre and Strapi. And then later in this section, it writes the logs to the CloudWatch. It runs one Strapi container and uses Fargate. And while in the networking, it uses the default VPC subnets, and the security groups previously created will be attached to this ECS service. And then it provides the output, which is which I particularly set to the endpoint of the database, and then ECS cluster name to easy to navigate through the CLI. and then ECS service name. Like now, let's have a look over the task over the AWS. When I hit the Terraform apply command, it starts provisioning the infrastructure over the AWS, and at the finally later in the final stage, it provided me the output, which was ECS cluster name, which is a Strapi cluster here, and then provided the endpoint and the service name. Let's have a look as we can see that it created a cluster in the ECS while giving a deep dive. There is a service as we have created. Let's have a task. Let's have a look on the task, which, yes, there is a one task already running as we desired for the only one task. And there is, and it provides the ANI ID and then public ID. Let's copy this public IP. Before moving, let's have a look on the log groups as it created a log group for ECS Strapi, and there is logs. At present, it is only one. So let's have a look on the Strapi project, and boom, the Strapi CMS headless application is deployed over the AWS. Thank you.